Welcome to the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast, where we talk to computer scientists who immigrated from their home countries for study or for work or for other reasons. In these oral history interviews, you will find established and renowned computer scientists from across academia and industry narrating their experiences of immigrating from where they grew up to a completely different land, often the US. My name is Indy Gupta, and I'm your host. This is a remix episode. As usual, you can find all episodes and detailed episode guides on our website, csimmigrant.org. Again, that's csimmigrant.org. And you can find us and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and basically wherever you get your podcasts. This episode is structured into acts or chapters. You'll find chapter markers on your audio player, and you can use these to jump between the acts or chapters. This is a remix episode. Alternate realities. Children grow up very differently in different parts of the world. Countries vary vastly in their education systems, opportunities, family and cultural norms, societal and political conditions, and in general, growing up is unique in each country of this world. Immigrants who grew up elsewhere and who currently reside in the US or in Canada are often very well placed to make comparisons among these different systems across the world because they've experienced multiple systems. They grew up elsewhere and they see other children growing up in the US or Canada, perhaps their own kids, perhaps their nieces or nephews, or perhaps other students they teach. So, I asked several of my guests on the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast during Season 2 a hypothetical question about alternate realities. First up is Regina Barzilay, professor at MIT, who as a double immigrant has a most unique viewpoint on this hypothetical question. Regina grew up in Moldova or Moldavia, a nation in East Europe. Then she immigrated to Israel in 1990, did her bachelor's in Israel. Then she immigrated to the US in 1997 as a housewife, but then did her PhD in the US. The next question I want to ask is a little bit hypothetical, but I'll ask it anyway. So you grew up a little bit in Moldavia and then a little bit in Israel, and then finally you immigrated to the US. Did you ever think that, hey, if I had grown up in one country, maybe if I'd grown up completely in the US, all else being equal, me being the same person, maybe my life and career may have been very different. Or if I'd grown up completely in Israel from when I was a child, my life and career may have been different. Is this something that you ever thought of?
I don't think about that, but what I do think about sometimes is like, I think I was very privileged that I've seen so many different people in different countries and different attitudes, and they definitely all shaped my understanding of the world and helped me to be robust, in all these different situations. But, the part that I am sort of lacking, I feel that, there are big parts of my life that's how we started our interview, that, Kishinev lives in my head. It doesn't look like what is in my head for decades already. And there are parts that are totally remote. I do not, I cannot go to the school where I studied. I cannot connect to the people with whom I grew up. And that's what I really miss. I'm always wondering, how are they doing? And I remember some gardens that I really loved. I'm always thinking, how are these gardens? There is this feeling of something, this nostalgic feeling that I have in me. But on the other hand, I'm thinking that somebody who even grew up in Boston, Boston doesn't look today what it was in 70s. So this is what I miss. And I also sometimes, think that people who grew up in one place, they can connect to the place in a very different way than those of us who are replanted to these places. And, and I was always wondering, how is it if you're really grounded in your environment and you have all these connections and you know exactly, you know, what this person was doing 10 years ago, which I typically don't. So, but it's just, you know, one of the pathways that could have happened. So.
The next voice is Tal Rabin, Head of Research at Algorand Foundation and professor at UPenn. Tal grew up in Israel starting from the 1960s and immigrated to the US in 1994 for her postdoctoral studies. You were born in the US. Imagining that you had stayed in the US and had grown up through the US educational system, early school, middle school, high school, and university here, and everything else being equal, you know, your personality, your life, your family, your parents, do you think your life and career may have evolved differently than what it did?
I think that, as I said, there were lucky points, right? At the end of my bachelor's, the problem that Michael gave me.
Yeah.
So I don't know if those two determining facts would have happened in another path. I don't know if there could have been something like that. I don't know. But I think I would have been different. I would have not been me had I not grown in Israel. My life in Israel, the relationships, the country, the smells, the sun, everything, the food, it's me.
That is so beautiful. Next up is Jon Stoica, professor at UC Berkeley and founder of multiple immensely successful startup companies, Databricks, Conviva, and Anyscale. Jon grew up in Romania starting from the 1960s and immigrated to the US in 1994 for his PhD. Here's my conversation with Jon Stoica. If instead of growing up in Romania in a parallel world, you had grown up, say, in the US from when you were a child, all else being equal, you are the same person, family support is there, everything else is there. Do you think your life and career choices may have been different?
Professionally, no. I don't think professionally I would have been different, especially since probably, the emphasis on arts is probably even less here than United States, than in Romania. Yeah. And in literature or things like that, I was not that good to start with, so that was not my strength. But I think that growing up in Romania, in a small country, I grew in a much more open society, despite the fact that it was communist, right, towards the world. And if I'm just thinking about, one good thing about communism, you always need to, you can emphasize on the good parts, because there was no way, there are very few ways to have fun, entertainment. Mm-hmm. By the way, in the last year, there are like 2 or 3 hours of TV per day. And these are just, news, right? News about the Communist Party. Yeah. So I read a lot, right? And literature, and so I read, Russians, all the, French literature, German literature. So all of these things I was, my parents always bought all these books. And I think that shapes you, right? And I think that if I grew here, for sure I would have been exposed much less to this kind of more the world as a whole. And the other thing is that, look, it was tough during communism. And, sometimes maybe this makes you to want more some things, to appreciate some things more, not take them for granted. So yes, that's probably also has an impact, right? Makes you to have more grit, provides you more, also makes you more resilient, right? When you grow in a country, you saw a revolution, you saw shortage of food, of gas, and things like that. Pretty much the basics. You grow in a country in which, to get a car, it takes years, right? And it's a big event, right? And what car, so when when you grow in that environment, it's like you talk about failures and hardships. You can put them in perspective. So it has to do something like that. Or even here is another things, like you go and probably this is in India as well. It's when you go at school, you are 6 year old. It's can be, it's brutal, right? You have the grades everything is public, right? The grades are public. You are going to be asked in front of the house of the class to answer questions. You are, if you don't know, you are shamed and so forth. And it shapes you, right? By the way, as a matter of fact, I think that kids are extremely resilient, because despite all of this, kids, everyone is still very happy, right?
Yeah.
But still, I don't know how, like there are these things, intangibles, environment and context, which you don't control, which shape you.
Next up is Rada Mihalcea, professor at the University of Michigan and director of Michigan AI Lab. Rada grew up in Romania starting from the 1970s and immigrated to the US in 1997 for graduate school. Here's my conversation with Rada Mihalcea. If you had not grown up in Romania, but instead you had been born in the US, same family, everything else being the same, your parents being the same, and you had gone through the US educational system, you think your life and career may have been different? And this is a hypothetical question.
Well, it's a good question, hard question. I think they probably would have been different. In terms of interest in math and languages, maybe not. In terms of values, I think would have been different. Like what I value and what matters to me, I'm pretty sure that would have been very different. So I grew up under a lot of hardship. And again, I don't say it for others to pity me, because I don't pity myself. It's just a fact. And I always saw the positives of it. Like I don't watch TV now because we didn't have any TV then. So I just grew up not having the habit of sitting hours at a time in front of a TV. I don't necessarily value these material things. I don't care too much about them. And I think it's because of those times. So as a value system, I think I would have been different. Passion-wise, not. The other thing that I wonder is to what extent sort of these gender gaps that we see here, to what extent they would have affected me. They didn't as I was growing up. But here, I don't know. Sometimes they are a little bit more obvious than they were during my time in college. So that part, I don't know. I mean, I could see myself sometimes feeling that maybe that's not the place for me. I wouldn't give up because I don't like giving up. So I'm sure I would get back at it. But just in terms of experience, those feelings more often than I use in college, maybe that would be a difference.
The next voice is Thamar Solorio, professor at the University of Houston. Thamar grew up in Mexico starting from the 1970s, and after finishing her PhD from Mexico, she immigrated to the US in 2005 as a lecturer. Here's my conversation with Thamar Solorio. So looking back on your life, had you not grown up in Mexico, but had instead grown up completely in the US, do you think your life and your career choices may have been similar, or would they have been quite different? It's a purely hypothetical question.
I mean, I think about that scenario not that early in life. I mean, just in general, I think the career choices would have been different. The opportunities would have been different. If that assuming that I am the same person that I am today, because I'm really committed, I really want to do a good effort, and I really am competitive, and I want to do well. But I do think about this in graduate school. Like I do think about what would have happened if I immigrated for my PhD.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
instead of when I did.
Yeah.
And I think that would have been very different. Not that I would have ended up being a faculty professor, but I think the path to my dream job would have been shorter if I had emigrated earlier, because the opportunities would have been more easily accessible.
Right. So that awareness at that point of the PhD programs in the US and those opportunities opening up would have changed your life quite a bit more.
Quite a bit more. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure about, drastically more.
Yeah.
It's hypothetical.
Yeah.
And just in general, I often feel like I have so many gaps in other areas of my life, like growing up, living here in the US and growing up a family here. I have like this, I feel like I'm constantly filling these gaps in context and the cultural background. Sometimes it's exhausting, but that's what we do, right? As immigrants, we're always trying to, okay, so this is what we're supposed to do. Oh, okay, so this is now what we're supposed to do. Oh, and this is what happens now. And,
Yeah. It's a very common immigrant feeling, missing some of the cultural references that get brought up. Kind of trying to find out, hey, what is this cartoon that they're referring to from the 1980s or whatever?
Exactly. Exactly.
Next up is Moshe Vardi, professor at Rice, who grew up in Israel in the 1950s to 1980s and immigrated to the US in 1981 for a postdoc. My next question is a little bit hypothetical, but I'll ask it anyway. So you grew up in Israel, and then you did your bachelor's, master's, and PhD there, and then eventually you moved here to the US and you stayed here. If in a parallel world you had been born in the US and you had gone through the US educational system, all else being equal, you're the same person, you have the same kind of family. Do you feel like your career and your life may have been different? And again, this is a hypothetical question.
I mean, it's kind of not completely hypothetical in the following sense that both of my parents are Holocaust survivors. They met in what's called a DP camp in Germany. DP stands for Displaced Persons Camp. The Allies. There were so many people who were displaced in the war. The Allies created the places where these people can come and settle down and then figure out where are they going to go from here. So my parents met in a displaced persons camp. And my father wanted to go to America. America was to be the golden state, the golden country. You go there and life is good. Israel was no Israel yet, and there was fairly clear it's going to be a war.
Yeah.
And in fact, my mother had a brother, and he lost his wife and daughter in the Holocaust. And he said, I cannot stomach another war. And he came to the United States. And my mother said to my father, we're going to go to Israel, to Palestine. And they went to Palestine and had to fight a war. They came to Israel. My mother in late 47, my father in early 48. And there was a war. They had to fight in what we call the 48 war. We call it the War of Independence. Okay. But I could not so far to imagine a scenario where they decide to go to America. Okay. Right. And I'm born in America. I think growing up in Israel probably gave me, there is a phrase, tough time make strong men, strong people. Strong people create successful times. Successful time create weak people. Weak people create hard times. Okay?
It's a full cycle.
It's a cycle. So growing up in Israel, as I said, having to, as a child, dealing with terrorism, like from age 12, the realization that there's some people who want to kill me. Yeah. And this, you can think what you want about the conflict and what to do about it. But the reality is, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It is someone traumatizing. And I'm sure it is also traumatizing to Palestinian children. I'm not trying to take any of this away. Okay. Yeah. But going like that, serving in the military, where you learn both discipline and responsibility and also leadership. I mean, it's hard for me to separate who I am.
Right.
I mean, yes, of course, we all know about this nature versus nurture, but the answer, it is both. Yes, I come to the world with a certain genetic imprint, and this genetic imprint is just potential to do certain things. Will you do these things or not?
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so it's very hard to say what I would be like. I mean, here, for example, especially in academia, I have leveraged my academic freedom and tenure, and I had very open disagreements with the administration here. Yeah. And I did not shy from such very open disagreements. I have tenure, but I mean, it's just I know other people with tenure that wouldn't do that. So I can't tell you exactly, but I said, this is, people tried to kill me before, so this is not so bad. They're not going to kill me. They're upset at me. They're not going to kill me. Yeah. I won't get a raise. It's not so bad as being killed. So you cannot separate. You grow up in Israel, and it shapes me as I am.
And finally, we have Ricardo Baeza-Yates, professor at Northeastern University in Silicon Valley, and also leader of multiple Yahoo labs across 4 continents. Ricardo grew up in Chile in South America, starting from the 1960s. But he's lived and worked on 4 continents: Europe, South America, Asia, and North America. Here's my conversation with Ricardo Baeza-Yates. I want to ask a hypothetical question. So you grew up mostly in Chile, and then you've spent a lot of your time later in different countries. So you've kind of sampled these countries a lot. I want to ask, in a parallel world, if you had not grown up in Chile, but you'd been the same person, all else being equal, family being equal, but suppose you had grown up in Canada or maybe even in the US, do you think your life and your career choices may have been the same, or would they have been different? Again, it's a hypothetical question.
Interesting question. Never thought about it. At first, I think maybe the choices would have been the same, but I would say that many things in my life would have been much easier. For example, research funding in Chile in my first years was not like being in the US or Canada. So I would say that maybe my career could have been faster if I were in a developed country because of availability of resources. Although you compete with more people, so you never know. Yeah. You never know if you are the tail of the lion or the head of the lion, right? And that changes with the context. Right. So it's very hard to say, but I would say that maybe many things would have been the same. Something for sure. If you asked me 30 years ago where I would be today, I would have never guessed. So I would have never thought about many things I've done just because I saw the opportunity and I took it. Right. Not only living in Spain or Canada, but also I have been my sabbaticals partly in Australia, New Zealand, and now in the US. So yes, I have this sample of living in different places and also, as I said, being in 85 different countries. Shows you the diversity, the contrast. Yeah. I love to learn also when I go to a place and I don't know things. So I'm asking things all the time, and sometimes I ask silly questions. Other times I ask questions that people say, "Well, I never thought about that," and I may not know the answer. Like, for example, relations of semantics of geographical names with history and so on, because I like geography and history.
If you liked this episode, then you can also listen to the full interviews with each of these amazing technologists in Season 2 of our show. That's in episodes 24 through episode 35. Each interview features the origin story of the technologist, their educational path, their decision and thoughts on immigration, obstacles they faced along the way, and a discussion on their retrospectives and perspectives. Check it out. Again, that's episodes 24 through 35 in Season 2 of our show. As usual, you can find all episodes and detailed episode guides on our website, csimmigrant.org. Again, that's csimmigrant.org. And you can find us and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and basically wherever you get your podcasts. All the music used in episodes of the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast is royalty-free. All voice recordings were performed with and are reproduced with full consent of narrators and participants. You can find music credits on our website. Join the online discussion about this podcast on all major social media, including Twitter and Facebook, with the handle CSImmigrant and hashtag CSImmigrant. And of course, the episode guide is available at our website, csimmigrant.org. This is the Immigrant Computer Scientists Podcast.